Hello my friends, this is Lindy. Welcome to Lindy's Magpie Reads. This is Friday, May 20th, and in the past week I read 11 books, and I'm not going to talk about them all on this video. 8 of those books were by Indigenous authors, so I am going to do a special all Indigenous wrap up of this past week, although I might not get that up until Saturday. So that just leaves 3 books to talk about. So this should be short and sweet. 2 of them are about birds and 1 is a cookbook. So if you're here for the cookbook, I'm doing that one at the end. And I am going to start with, I think, the best out of these 3. As a matter of fact, I heard about it from a prize list, the LA Times nonfiction prize. It's A World on the Wing, The Global Migration of Migratory Birds, and it's by Scott Weidensaul. The audiobook is read by Mike Lenz. So many fascinating things. So there's lots of new discoveries in the whole world of birds. But I have to say, one thing that really struck me is something that the author's mother said to him. She told him it really bugged her that scientists are always saying, we used to think, but now we know. And then whatever it is that they know ends up being something that is superseded by new science. So Weidensaul says researchers should be saying, we used to think, but now we think, which makes total sense to me. I like that. So anyways, because they've got a lot of nanotechnology now, they're able to track migrations on much smaller birds than they used to be able to before. Because they can carry GPS trackers and stuff like that. So even little tiny birds like hummingbirds, Scott Weidensaul has himself tagged over 100 hummingbirds of various species, and they are such small little birds that he makes the tags himself using, I think, jeweler's tools. But he talks about how hardy these hummingbirds are. There's a rufous hummingbird that they know of, that a colleague banded, who survived temperatures of -9 Fahrenheit and wind chills of more than -30 Fahrenheit. Wow. So people are seeing them at their feeders, for example, when it's all snowy outside and they get worried about these birds, but they're still fattening up for their big journey. And I have pictures of some of these migratory birds in a different book, which I've read in the past. So Migrations, Incredible Animal Journeys. It's not only birds in this book, which is written by Mike Unwin, illustrated by Jenni Desmond. The information will be down below. It's got these lovely illustrations and usually just a short bit of information about how amazing these birds are. Bar-headed geese are in this book too. Their migration takes them over the Himalayan mountains. So the highest mountain range in the world. So these birds not only have less access to oxygen as they are going higher, but the air pressure is lower, so they have to beat their wings harder in order to stay aloft. And they – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – –– ––– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – –– – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – – –−– – –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– –– powered ascent of any bird that we know of. So in the spring, the flocks come up from the Indian lowlands, and then when they get to the Himalayan mountains, they're rising at speeds of an average of 3,000 feet an hour, and in some cases over 7,000 feet an hour for more than 3 hours. Human climbers require weeks or even months to acclimatize to that kind of high altitude for comparison. The other thing about migratory birds, from the largest to the smallest, is they have so many adaptations. So the more that scientists study them, the more they realize that there are things that we might be able to learn that will benefit humans from birds. So, for example, birds, in preparation for their long trips, they'll jettison organs in their body that they don't need for the trip. You know, just they'll fatten themselves up, and then their digestive and stomach organs just shrink down to nothing, keeping only lungs and brain, and develop pec muscles for the flying, you know, that sort of thing. Weidensaul compares a shorebird that is migrating for 8 or 9 days straight without stopping, without rest, without food or water, to an elite male cyclist, say in the middle of the Tour de France race. So those cyclists are operating at about 5 times their base metabolism rate. These shorebirds are operating at 8 or 9 times their resting metabolic rate. And they're doing it nonstop. Just so amazing. So amazing. A migrating bird can put alternating halves of its brain to sleep while flying for days, weeks, or even months on end. And when forced to stay fully awake, it has evolved defenses against the effects of sleep deprivation. In fact, birds actually seem to get mentally sharper under such conditions. Well, think about what we can learn about sleep from birds. So awesome, just awesome. And the way they navigate with many different ways, including a form of quantum mechanics. Oh. Yeah, I highly recommend this book. I also picked up a book that I thought would have more migration in it. It's called The Homing Instinct, subtitled Meaning and Mystery in Animal Migration. It's by Bernd, Heinrich. One of my commenters, who goes by the handle Curious a while back, at the end of April, recommended a different one of Heinrich's books called Raven in Winter. And perhaps I should have picked up that one instead. I wasn't happy with Heinrich's writing in this one, although there's some good information. But also, it's more about home as opposed to migration. There's a little bit about migration. The parts that I didn't like are when it seems like Heinrich is really leaping and making assumptions without a solid basis. So, for example, when he's talking about the sandhill cranes, he watches them mating in Alaska. and then talks about that a crane wing was found in a Neolithic dwelling. Seeing the close parallels in the biology of birds with their own lives, and understanding the crane's dancing as helping to make or cause the good things that followed, Neolithic people would have been compelled to symbolically emulate the crane dance of homecoming and of new life. So yes, Neolithic people would have been compelled to symbolically emulate the crane dance of homecoming and of new life. Maybe, maybe not. But by the way, this book has got a picture of cranes. These are whooping cranes though, not the sandhills. But they also do a mating dance. Oh yeah, the next chapter in here is on beelining, and he's talking about in the U.S. How he used to participate in finding wild bee nests and then marking the tree. And it said it didn't matter whose property it was on. If once the tree was marked, it was your honey to come back for later. Which seems kind of strange to me. And he didn't mention that these are not native bees. These wild bees are European bees that were imported with settlers. Although later on in the book he does mention that very thing in a different chapter. In a chapter called Fire, Hearth, and Home, he says that the defining human trait has to do with using fire as a tool. This book was written in 2014, and we now know that birds also use fire to flush prey. This is a quote, "Nomadism is a strategy that reduces internal conflict, but at a price. In India, one of the most overpopulated countries in the world, nomadism is a way of life for many people. There are groups that have adapted to it and become specialists at it. However, despite that learned lifestyle, those practicing nomadism would gladly give it up. The nomads live out of their carts for the simple reason that they have no choice." And there's a Lohar woman who told a journalist, "If I would be the most happy person in the world if I get some land and a house." Again, it seems like jumping to conclusions for me. Sure, some people want a home, but not necessarily all people. So, yeah, I don't recommend the homing instinct. Now, on to food. I had fun reading East, Vegan and Vegetarian Recipes from Bangalore to Beijing. The author is Meera Sodha, who has done a column on vegan food for The Guardian. And there are beautiful photographs in here. I tried 4 of the recipes. The chili tofu, which is Indo-Chinese cuisine, a Sichuan eggplant recipe, pineapple love cake, which is from Sri Lanka, well, adapted to be a pineapple upside down cake, and I made Vietnamese coffee ice cream. What can I say? Some of the times I wondered about her recipes. So this one, sweet potato cakes with kimchi mayo. She has you fry these in a teaspoon of oil until they're nice and brown on both sides. And I'm thinking, 1 teaspoon, and that's going to be enough to get nice and brown on both sides of 4 patties? Yeah, it seemed like a stretch to me. I should mention that about 80% of these recipes are vegan or easily made vegan, and they're clearly marked. If it's a vegan option, it's marked, and it's often something that's really small, like the non-vegan version will have honey and the vegan version will say to use agave syrup, or the non-vegan version will be served with yogurt and the vegan option would be to use a vegan yogurt. Yeah, so pretty simple. A reminder to use the vegan chocolate if you want to make the recipe vegan. In the section on noodles, there's quite a description of the different types of noodles around the world and how you would use them, and she has quite a variety in her recipes as well, including this rutabaga laksa, which I'm going to try in the future. I haven't made it yet, but she says it will, she urges any rutabaga dodger to think twice. Its buttery earthiness alongside the caramelized shallots adds a sweet and smoky magic. I'm actually not a rutabaga dodger, but I live with somebody like that. And speaking of living with somebody like that, I live with somebody who has said she will only eat eggplants in a dip, like baba ganoush. And I made the Szechuan eggplant dish when we had company, and it changed her mind. She said, okay, I like it this way too. The whole plateful was gone. In the section on rice, there's a lovely quote here. As one of life's pleasures, there's nothing like the steam that hits the face when you lift the lid of a freshly cooked batch of rice. It's like a portal to a tropical rainforest. I'm a big rice fan. And again, lots of explanation and pictures, different kinds of rice and how they're used. She uses vegetables like celery root, sunchokes, Brussels sprouts, so some less common vegetables, and some of the more prosaic vegetables like beets. She's got 5 different recipes for those. I think there are 7 recipes that use eggplants. Here's the photos for the whole roasted squash. So if you don't have a knife big enough or you're not strong enough to cut into a whole squash, then roast it first and then cut it open. And here's her description of what to do after. When cool enough to touch, slice the squash in half. Using your hand like a bear's paw, claw out the seeds from the middle of the squash, or scoop out using a spoon and discard. Okay. So the pineapple love cake is a vegan recipe, and I was very happy with it, and so were my neighbors on both sides. They got chunks of cake. The Vietnamese coffee ice cream was also delicious. I will definitely make that again. There was a recipe for nutmeg and lime and coconut green beans, and in that one the recipe called for 1 whole nutmeg or a 1/4 teaspoon ground. I was kind of like, that's a big difference. A whole nutmeg. I usually grate my own nutmeg, and you're going to get a whole lot more than a 1/4 teaspoon if you use a whole nutmeg. But then when I read the recipe, it says to grate about 1/3 of the nutmeg over the beans. And still, I'm not sure why it said to have a whole nutmeg then instead of a third of a nutmeg. The way that she writes up her recipes, it's helpful if you already have experience with cooking. She makes salad dressing and sauces from cashews that are ground up or in the blender. She always makes a note if the recipe requires the use of a blender. And she'll say to use unsalted cashews, but she doesn't say whether they should be raw or roasted. And there's nowhere in the notes where that is specified, which I think is kind of important. But overall, I really felt inspired by this cookbook, and I was very glad to have it out from the library. So that is all I've got to say about these 3 books. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you will come back and check out 8 Indigenous books in my very next video, coming soon. Bye.